Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. I'm James Heale and I'm joined today by defence expert and former MP Bob Seeley. Today we're discussing the fact that the UK this morning announced the decision to hand over control of the Chagos Islands to the Mauritian government. There are future plans to draw up a treaty and it's expected that this is going to be concluded very quickly. The news was announced today given the fact that Mauritius goes into a general election campaign starting tomorrow. Bob, tell us first of all your reaction to this decision today.
I have to say, I think it's a very, very poor one. And frankly, James, it's a completely unnecessary one. Were under no pressure to give up the Chagos Islands. The Chagos Islanders themselves don't particularly want this deal. The only people who seem to profit by it are going to be the Chinese and potentially the Mauritian government, because it will give them greater clout with the Chinese. But we are effectively handing over, giving up a major strategic asset in the Indian Ocean that we didn't need to give up for no conceivable purpose. And you have got to wonder, what on earth is this government doing?
Now, of course, the government would say, look, we've got a 99-year lease on Diego Garcia. That's going to be able to ensure that we continue to have those strategic access to the Indian and Pacific Oceans. What do you think are the odds are that we'll see the 99-year lease respected and that in the year 2123, we're going to be able to see some sort of handover ceremony in 99 years' time?
Well, I mean, this is the thing. I have to say I'm pretty wary about that. There's a lot of there are a lot of ocean around, which is also has been included in deals with the Mauritian government, and you've got to wonder if the Chinese trawlers are going to be coming in there because they're going to pay fat inducements to a small island government. And find that actually the people who benefit most from this are going to be the Chinese, not only in security terms, but potentially in fishing terms as well. It just lacks coherence. So no, I have no faith that actually that other parties will stick to this agreement. They may do so for the first few years, but 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line, I find that hard to believe. And again, this is one of the reasons why we did not have to be doing this. So it begs the question, why the student politicians who run the Labour Party and sadly are now running the government are putting a sort of an ideology of decolonisation before the strategic interest of this country and the wider West.
Of course, you mentioned about Labour. I mean, it's fair to point out that these negotiations began 2 years ago under the Conservatives. You've obviously been talking to, former colleagues in government, etc. I mean, tell us about the kind of evolution of government thinking on this. Was this always just intended as a sort of way of carrying out negotiations and keeping on the talks going? And it's only now we've actually reached a conclusion that suddenly people like Tom Tugendhat and James Cleverly come out and go, hey, this is totally wrong. Was it never actually intended to reach a conclusion?
You make a very good point, James. I'm going to have to remember this from my days on the Foreign Affairs Committee, so I hope I'm accurate. And I've talked to Henry Smith, and Henry was on the Foreign Affairs Committee with me and is absolutely the expert on the Chagos. And I was chatting to him just before chatting with you. I don't know why it came up on the agenda. It should not have done, and frankly, a Conservative government should not have been putting the sovereignty of the Chagos Islanders on any agenda, let alone the Mauritian one. So I'm not quite sure why it happened. I think it was probably a combination of an international court judgment, which is completely non-binding, and some politics from China and Russia included in the United Nations. And it almost happened, I suspect, by default. I had friends in the MOD at the time who were privately despairing of a sort of FCO clique that insisted on peddling a decolonising agenda with this, i.e. giving it back. It was in not our national interest, not in our strategic interest, but in somebody's idea of what was the right thing to do, which I take issue with. David Cameron then came into the Foreign Office, and whatever happened before, he put a kibosh on it and said, it's not happening, which I thought absolutely was the right decision from David. It then came up towards then came up to the Foreign Affairs Committee. Rosendale had been very vocal. Andrew Rosendale had been very vocal about this. Henry Smith had been excellent as well. And so there were significant voices saying, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? There is no need to be engaging in this sort of political charade. There is no need to be doing this. And several of the things that is really concerning is that you now have David Lammy. Again, just the level of distruth or non-truth told by this government really surprises me. He's basically saying that it was under threat and we needed a long-term solution. It wasn't under threat. and we had a long-term solution, which was British sovereignty. Yeah, there was no need to voluntarily give this up, and we saw some of their decision. Okay, Lord Ross Kempsell in the House of Lords was asking about this a month ago and was getting very misleading answers back from the FCO, basically saying it was premature to even speculate. Well, clearly they were in the last stages of a negotiation to give this away, and they presented a fait accompli, and they've misled members of Parliament, in this case Ross in the House of Lords. They've misled members of Parliament to do so, and that was Jenny Chapman answering on behalf of the Foreign Office, which I thought was a disgrace.
Well, just going to say, it's 9 days ago, actually, when that answer came back. It was the 24th of September that Baroness Chapman answered it. So 9 days ago, it would be too premature to speculate, as you say.
Sorry to interrupt the show, but if you enjoy what we do here at Spectator TV, then why not subscribe to the magazine as well? If you subscribe today, you get 12 weeks for just £12, plus a free £20 John Lewis and Waitrose gift card. You can sign up at spectator.co.uk/TV offer.
I mean, I don't know. Is that disingenuous? Is that a deliberate lie? Is this just the sort of culture that we're going to get from this Labour government, who has criticised the Conservatives for anything they conceivably could in our time in office, and then actually have proved, despite our faults, and we had them, and it was after 14 years in government, they have started off by doing everything so much worse than we were trying to do, whether it's in the dishonesty, whether it's the lies told about the 22 billion black hole, whether it's in Keir Starmer being the leading MP with his snout in the freebie trough, or whether it's now David Lammy, a man who's shown himself to be wholly out of his depth, being Foreign Secretary, sadly, for the United Kingdom, saying untrue things to justify giving up a strategic base that we did not need to give up. And not only that, but the Chagos Islanders themselves are not necessarily supportive of this, because their relationship with the Mauritians is not a good one. And okay, they were treated badly by us in the 1960s, no doubt about that. But actually, they do not support this handover either. It is breathtaking that we're doing something to weaken our security, weaken our strategic footprint in the Indian Ocean, when we don't need to be doing so.
And you mentioned there about the MOD earlier in your answer, and I wonder perhaps that's traditionally seen as perhaps the stumbling block, or maybe the hold on preventing kind of something like this. I mean, do you think their concerns in the Ministry of Defence have been addressed or overridden when it comes to the Chagos Islands?
Okay, very good question, James. When we had a Conservative Foreign Secretary, certainly with David Cameron, the MOD concerns were absolutely listened to. And I think it was probably wiser voices in the FCO and the MOD, and probably Number 10, all saying, yeah, this is not a good idea. Let's not do this. Yeah, which was the right answer. The only error there was that it was ever put on the agenda in the first place. And clearly, as soon as Labour has come in, you've got the sort of woke warriors in the FCO saying, let's decolonise the Chagos Islanders. And sadly, you've got the MOD muted. I don't buy what the MOD says, and I don't buy what David Lammy says, because it is very obviously untrue.
And I think in terms of the future then, I mean, do you see this as a pattern for future behaviour? Given obviously we have a number of British overseas territories, I mean, there is talk today perhaps of others, most notably arguably the Falkland Islands, being then thinking about their own future in terms of negotiation with countries that have made it very clear they want those islands, even if, of course, they've never had them in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, this reminds me of their foolish decision just to give huge sums of public money to buy off the train drivers, effectively as a quid pro quo for making life hell under the Conservatives. So they were paying off their mates, and then they did it with junior doctors, and then they didn't realise that the consequences of their bad decisions were that the nurses would then kick off as well. And we're going to have the same unintended consequences with this, because now we're handing over, for no reason whatsoever, the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. That is only going to encourage people in Argentina to say, well, what about the Falklands? Or Spanish nationalists to say, what about Gibraltar? Or Cypriots to say, what about the sovereign bases in Cyprus? This is opening up a can of worms that didn't need to be opened. There was no reason to do this. David Lammy's statement is wholly untrue. It is not going to make us safer. We are giving up a strategic asset for no reason apart from somebody's idea of a political agenda within the Labour Party and potentially in the FCDO as well. It is a wholly bad decision. And I think it just shows the sort of the lack of competence, the lack of foresight, the lack of strategic thinking in this Labour government, which is frankly surprising all of us at how bad it is. I thought they would be worse, but I didn't realise they'd be this bad.
And you've got a book coming out, Bob, on the future of dealing with Russia and the war that's been going on there. There's been a suggestion today around that one of the reasons the UK made this decision was because they need to kind of keep support in the global south on side. They want to keep African nations behind the West's support for Kyiv. Do you think that potentially in a bid to support UK strategic interests in one sphere, the European sphere, they end up of giving up a trump card in quite another, which is the Indo-Pacific region, and that in our efforts to try and combat one imperialist posturing of a country like Russia, they might have accidentally abetted and aided the efforts of China in another?
I don't know who's saying that, James, but whoever is saying that has not got a grasp on how international relations works. The idea that is going to encourage African nations or developing world nations to suddenly support Kiev, I think, is completely without foundation. And anyone who is arguing that, in my humble opinion, shows that they have no concept of how international relations works. Needlessly giving up a strategic asset, needlessly negating your own hard interests in security, does not buy respect or affection. It actually buys a quiet contempt and a feeling that you can be played. So actually, I think we would be much more respected if our attitude towards our own interests and our own strategic and national interests was rather more robust. And I'm afraid to say this is naive student politics at its worst, being played out to the detriment of the UK national and frankly the Western strategic interest.
And Bob's book, which is out next spring with a working title of Total War, dealing with Russia's attempts to undermine and attack the Western Ukraine, will be out next spring. Thank you very much for joining us, Bob, on Spectator TV today.